Hi, everyone. We're going to talk about Milton's Paradise Lost. Now, this is known as the greatest epic poem ever written in the English language. It is very long, as epic poems usually are. Um, and it basically retells the story of Genesis, of Adam and Eve, of the eating of the apple, and then losing their immortality and their privilege of living in Eden, and therefore they lose paradise. Paradise Lost. Before I get into the poem in the next video, I'm going to talk to you a little bit about how it came to be known as the greatest poem in the English language, or the greatest epic poem in the English language. It wasn't always the case. Milton's poem was written in the 17th century, and its reputation really rose more and more through the 18th century. The 18th century is when the reputation of many of the literary works that we know today was established. So Shakespeare probably gained most of his popularity and prominence in the 18th century. And Milton had a tougher time. He had a much tougher time because Milton was associated with a certain political movement that was quite dangerous in its day, more than dangerous. Milton was a rebel. Milton was on the side of the Parliament against the king during the English Civil War. So the 17th century featured the most, let's say, bloody confrontation between political forces on the British Isles and all of its history. It was a battle between King Charles I, who supposedly was interested in establishing an absolutist monarchy, may or may not be true, depending on who you talk to, and the Parliament that was resisting Charles I's taxation and other things like that. And that did not end very well for Charles I. He was defeated, and eventually he was executed. And then the Parliament, the parliamentary leader, let's say the person who fought for the Parliament, Oliver Cromwell, eventually took over for about almost 11 years, and Milton was on that side. Milton was on the side of Cromwell. He wrote texts in praise of Cromwell. He worked for Cromwell as a Latin secretary. And, you know, today, even in the 18th, 19th century, when you look at Milton, the political part diminishes more and more. And then until all that is left is really the literary part. You know, people who are into English literature, people who study it, who teach it, they know this about Milton. This is part of studying Milton. But many people don't, and many people read the poem and read the poems and think, you know, this is an amazing text that retells the story, the biblical story, in incredibly beautiful and rhythmic and lyrical and visual ways, and it's incredible. It even has very powerful dramatic elements like the character of Satan, which is surprisingly attractive, surprisingly moving. Here you have an image of Satan right here. In a crucial moment in hell. He's talking to other angels that have fallen. So you might read it, you might say, you know, incredible, I don't care about the politics. But think about this in today's terms. Say you had a person like, Bernie Sanders. I'm wearing my Bernie Sanders shirt here. Not to say, you know, my political persuasion is, I just like the shirt. Say you have Bernie Sanders, and Bernie Sanders ends up writing the most incredible poem ever. And little by little, people forget that he was a candidate for president, that he supported certain policies that people call socialist, other people call dangerous, other people call amazing. And then after 100 years, all that's left is Bernie Sanders' poem. Imagine Tucker Carlson. I don't know if you know the Fox host, who I think is a Trump supporter, is right now talking about how terrible the vaccines are, et cetera, et cetera. He's very popular on the right. And imagine if Tucker Carlson started sculpting beautiful sculptures, and little by little, we forgot his political persuasion. So this is what Milton was all about. He was a very prominent Republican, as they called the people who believed in an alternate form of government as opposed to a pure monarchy. And some people say he even supported the execution of the king. So the 18th century saw lots of battles around the reputation of Milton and about Shakespeare. Shakespeare was an easier play, as I said before. He did not have explicit political commitments, but he was. You can find those in Shakespeare if you look in a certain way, right? I would say he was a supporter of the dynasty of the Tudors. If you look at his works, and I think most people would agree who study history. But Milton was explicitly political, explicitly in favor of a Republican form of government, and even the word Republican has many meanings. It essentially means that there should be some standing for citizens in the government, some kind of representation, some kind of power to balance against the king, if there is a king. Certain forms of republicanism have no king. So that's what's happening with Milton. Now, why does this matter in the text? Well, in Genesis, when you read the Bible, read King James Bible, let's say, the most famous known version of the Bible, you don't have, Satan is not well developed. Satan is a serpent. There are some mentions of Satan throughout the Bible. In the New Testament, Satan tempts Jesus, but he's not that well developed of a character. He is thrown in hell, but he certainly isn't a character wearing armor. Here he has a spear, a character who opposes God for special reasons that he talks about in Paradise Lost. And if you read Paradise Lost, you start to get the feeling that Milton is creating a situation where Satan and the angels are actually a military group that's attempted to overthrow the monarchy of God. And they talk about it that way. And it's so interesting to think about, because if Milton is a rebel, like Milton supported Cromwell, he was against Charles I, then why would he make the most evil character in all of the universe a rebel too, right? So that's one of the big questions about Paradise Lost, one of the interesting issues about Paradise Lost. And there's some good answers to that. I'll leave that to you guys. So, but certainly you'll see a lot of military metaphors throughout Paradise Lost. He's wearing armor. And in this scene here, one of the most famous scenes of Paradise Lost, Satan is seen with other angels. See, there's an angel down in the muck there, and they're in this horrible place that's called hell, or going to be called hell. This is the beginning of everything. They've just fallen from the sky after being thrown over the walls, the diamond crystalline walls of heaven, and they have fallen for 9 days and 9 nights. So the part of Paradise Lost is this beautiful visual component written by a guy who's blind. And here's Satan. The quotation here is from another part of the book, but the part that I want to talk about, where he's in this kind of situation, is where Satan is rousing his troops. He's saying, we've fallen, we're here at the bottom. How much worse can it get? The mind can make a hell of heaven or a heaven of hell. One of the most famous lines in Paradise Lost. And he's kind of saying, come on, guys, have courage. We can still do this. Get up and fight. And I'll think of different ways of doing this, right? And he's kind of encouraging his troops to rise up again and saying, we're in hell, but it's our mind that makes hell. We can make a heaven out of hell. We can rule in hell. A person living in heaven can make a hell out of heaven just by the power of his mind. So here you have Satan giving a speech. And this type of speech, the type of speech that's given to an outnumbered army and an underdog army, is a kind of speech we usually associate with heroes, right? If you watch tons of Hollywood movies, of Netflix, of HBO specials, Lord of the Rings, there's moments where the army is expected to lose and somebody goes to the front, and just says, we have to fight no matter what. This is also in Shakespeare and Henry IV. It's based on a real battle in France, Agincourt. Rousing speeches. And here you have Satan making this kind of speech. And this is just one of the many moments of complexity and I dare say beauty in the character of Satan in Paradise Lost. So all of this is kind of the background to get us ready for, what is an incredible poem, what is a really unique and complex poem. I won't go into how Milton exactly became famous in the 18th century, who was on his side and who was against him. Actually, some very prominent people on both sides. And very interesting how Milton and the American revolutionaries and the French revolutionaries were kind of all involved in this debate around politics and rebellion. But I won't go into that because I'd rather just go right into the poem and see how it begins, because the beginning of the poem is, just to take a look at it, will give you an idea of the complexity and the art of this poetic form. So you can take a little break here. I just finished up with the context of Paradise Lost, talked about the English Civil War, talked about Milton's role as a Republican and as I hesitate to call him a revolutionary. It's not a revolution, it's a civil war. Interesting that Milton was never executed when the son of the king came back in 1660, even though a lot of other people in the Civil War who were involved in the rebellion or revolution were executed by the king, by the son of the king. Maybe he had become too famous by then is another interesting question about Milton. People who know more than me about this, welcome to talk in the chat about this, who discover stuff or know stuff that I'm not quite filling in fully, or maybe I'm getting a couple things here and there, maybe not quite accurate. But here it is, Paradise Lost, book 1. And we're about to begin a little examination of this part of the book. So the first thing to think about when you're looking at this for the first time, and you're looking to, say, write an essay, or you're looking just to maybe get into this well-known text and enjoy it and reap all the benefits of a deep reading, a deep and beautiful and fruitful reading. The first thing is the language. Right now, you see that also even the typography a little bit is a little bit of a question here. So you'll see that there's this word first is spelled F-I-R-S-T, of course, but the S looks like an F, right? So this is part of the 18th century typography. This is from an 18th century edition of Paradise Lost. And I like to put it out there for you guys because there's something, in the spirit of the text, when you read it in a typography or a font, set by hand, letter by letter, about 300 years ago. There's something beautiful about that, I think. And you get used to it pretty fast. So here is the word taste. And obviously there's that little F that S that looks like an F. So that's the first thing, the typography. And then the language. So what's going on with the language? It's 10 beats per line, like many English poems, like a lot of Shakespeare, right? To be or not to be, that is the question, right? That's 10, 11, if you have little apostrophes, it could be 10. It's a 10 beat line, right? Very, very common in English literature. It does not rhyme. You see how the word fruit does not rhyme with taste, woe does not rhyme with man, and this is called free verse. Used in Shakespeare as well, although Shakespeare occasionally slips back and forth between rhyming and not rhyming, and Romeo and Juliet and Hamlet and things like that. So it's called free verse, and it's good for epics because the writer can be free to flow without having to figure out, which word should rhyme and not. Although there's many amazing epics that have rhymed in a very strict way, Dante's Inferno. Alexander Pope wrote some incredible long poems with rhyming, but he's chosen free verse and even brags about it a little bit later down here. So that's the kind of the line it is. It actually does make a big deal in understanding it and understanding what he's trying to convey, because the choice of line says a lot about the topic. This is something maybe in the 21st century we don't think about too much, but if I were to have a rap song that rapped out the US Constitution as opposed to, say, a documentary, you'd have a different sense of the US Constitution, simply because of the form it's put in. Now, in poetry, the distinctions are not quite as exaggerated as what I just said, but sometimes a 6-beat line, different kinds of rhyming will indicate different types of seriousness, let's say, to the poem. So the 10-beat line makes a difference. It's called iambic. Oh no, it's called pentameter. Sorry. So of man's first disobedience and the fruit of that forbidden tree. So it does not begin with a subject or a verb. So that's another issue, the grammar. Of man's first disobedience and the fruit of that forbidden tree, whose mortal taste brought death into the world and all our woe. We're still waiting for the subject. Like how is this sentence organized? With loss of Eden, till one greater man restore us and regain the blissful seats, sing, heavenly muse. So that's it. So heavenly muse, he's saying, oh, heavenly muse, you know what a muse is, right? Sing about this moment in the history of the universe, right? This moment when man first disobeyed God, right? And sing about this forbidden tree, the tree of knowledge. Sing about how Jesus was brought to save us from this original sin, right? It says right here, one greater man restore us, right? So it's very traditional in the sense that he's asking this demigod, this Greek demigod, the muse, or at least one of the muses, to help him sing this song, right? So poetry is often connected to songs. And by the way, guys, if I'm saying stuff that's so basic for you, I apologize. I'm just trying to, I teach a lot of classes with all kinds of people in the group, and if I say things that are way obvious to you, just please bear with me. There are many elements that maybe are more interesting for you, but just bear with me and hope that it's okay for you. So if you guys know automatically what a muse is, okay, that's great. 9 muses, the 9 Greek muses. Okay, so the language is Latinate, right? The idea is that the subject and the verb are placed later in the sentence, not right away. It's like cookies I ate, or cookies ate I, right? So this is if you speak German, you might be familiar with this. And this also gives a message. And it gives the message that this is a serious poem. This is a poem that is drawn from antiquity, right? Drawn from one of the classical languages. This is a poem that is eternal, that is ancient, right? The grammar itself communicates that. So not to mention that Milton was fluent in written Latin, and he communicated with other world leaders at the time in Latin. He was a secretary, a Latin secretary, kind of a minister. So let's break it down and let's just try to get familiar with what's going on here, right? Of man's first disobedience, sing, right? So please, heavenly muse, sing of man's disobedience. There's a lot of beautiful stuff around why he chooses a muse, why he mixes a Greek demigod, which is the muse, right? There are the 9 muses, that each of the muses inspires different types of creative activity. There's the muse of music, right? Even has the word muse in it, right? The muse of history, Cleo, right? The muse of drama, the muse of tragedy, right? I don't know if a drama and tragedy are different. I think there's tragedy and comedy. But in the same sentence, he's got Jesus there, right? The loss of Eden, one greater man. There's Jesus. There's a reference to Eden, which is the Jewish Bible, right? The Old Testament. And then you got the Greek, the muse, which is a very familiar thing for poets to do, to take a look and say, to invoke the muse, to ask the muse for help. Because this is not something a human being can do, to tell such a tale. These tales involve divine inspiration, right? right? So what's going on here? Besides just saying all this stuff is together and jammed together, what's going on that's deeper, that we can see as a theme, that we can see as something important to understand about the poem. What's going on here is that Milton is doing what epics should be doing. Epics are there as usually most of the time an epic, like say you have a Beowulf or you have an Iliad or an Odyssey, an Inferno to some degree. Epics are there to tell the origin of a people. And that's why Milton's epic is so important. It's not just the story of the Bible, it's a story of a certain type of conception of Englishness, of Christian Englishness, that grounds that identity in a kind of eternal history, a history that will always stand, right? So when you read Beowulf, the Anglo-Saxon epic, okay, there's dragons, there's magic, there's impossible feats of bravery and courage. But really what it is, it's in its core, it's an explanation for the existence of those people, right? It's a justification for their existence, their eternality. The Aeneid is an epic that explains how Rome came to be. The Iliad, by contrasting the Greek warriors against the Trojan warriors, says this is our identity. We are not Eastern, we are Western, right? That's one interpretation of the Iliad. So this is an origin story. And to make an origin story, you have to absorb all the other stories within it. You have to make sense of the other stories within it. So while the Greek Muse is not a Christian nor a Jewish figure, it is still part of European consciousness and European history. And so he has to swallow it up, right, in his poem. Or he believes in the Muse, right? I mean, I explained it in this kind of torturous political way. Or he's just a dude who believes in the Muse. He's like, please, Muse, I'm praying to you. I need help writing this poem, right? So, so that's the story. But a lot of other people, Dante does this in Inferno, the story of the guy going to hell, being accompanied by Virgil. Virgil is a Roman poet that accompanies Dante into the Inferno. He happens to be the writer of the Aeneid, another epic, right? So part of it is that you're making sense of the whole universe through the lens of this one particular narrative. That's the story, right? So that's what this is all about, this first rich little phrase here, right? It's not even over yet. Of man's first disobedience and the fruit of that forbidden tree, whose mortal taste brought death into the world, and all our woe, all our problems come from this one mistake. With loss of Eden, till one greater man restore us and regain the blissful seat, sing, right? So we're waiting for Jesus to come and restore us to the location we originally came from, which is heaven, right? Seat means location or place in 18th century, or abode really, residence really means in 18th century English, 17th and 18th century English. So please sing that on the secret top of Oreb or of Sinai. So he's absorbing more and more classical, other tales, other places that are part of other traditions, Sinai from the Old Testament, right? Didst inspire that shepherd, this is Moses he's talking about, that shepherd who first taught the chosen seed. In the beginning, right? The first few words of the King James Bible. In the beginning, how the heavens and earth rose out of chaos, right? The chosen seed is Moses. Now, Moses is the writer of Genesis, right? So there he is invoking the person that he's taking over from, right? Just like Dante invokes Virgil, right? He's writing the new epic for his time. And here's Milton talking about the chosen seed, which are the chosen people, the Jews, right? And he taught the chosen seed in the beginning how the heavens and earth rose out of chaos. But then here we go back to the Greeks again. Chaos is a Greek concept of how the universe was before it was formed. It was a chaos. It was an emptiness, a tumult, right? And he works that into this, Milton works that into this poem as well. I'm going to skip around a couple more references to other things. I thence invoke thy aid to my adventurous song that with no middle flight intends to soar. So he asks the aid of the Muse to to help him fly, right? High above, right? Maybe high above all other poems, because it's a pretty, it sounds humble at first, please help me, Muse. But when he says no middle flight intends to soar, he's basically saying, I intend to write the greatest poem ever, not just some mediocre thing, and flying at middle height, the highest heights, right? Above the Aeonian Mount. I think here is referring to Parnassus, the mountain where the poets must climb in order to reach fame and reach accomplishment. So while it pursues, and here's the most braggy part of all, things unattempted yet in prose or rhyme, right? My poem is going to do things that have never been tried before. So he starts by this kind of humble prayer to the muse, but the period, here's the period. Oh my gosh, do we finally have a period here? The period comes with his most bold claim that this is going to be one of the greatest poems ever written. So there you go. And that is maybe a lesson. A lot of writers of the 18th century took this lesson, and like one of my favorite writers, as if you watch my videos, if you know me, you know that my favorite writer really basically of all time is Mary Wollstonecraft. Woman writer, late 18th century, famous for the rights of women, but also famous for her educational tracts, her politics, being the first female journalist, and a lot of other things. The mother of Mary Shelley, who wrote Frankenstein. So Mary Wollstonecraft gives this advice to younger writers, and she says, don't apologize for your writing. Your writing may not be great right now, but it'll get better. And there's no reason to apologize. We have plenty of bad books out there. So if you're not really bold enough to write your book and stand behind it, maybe you shouldn't write at all. But if you are going to write, be proud of what you're writing. And this is the advice she gave to a very interesting other female political writer called Mary Hayes. So here's the bragging here. Right? Not very modest at all. But Milton is an amazing writer, so maybe it's okay for him to brag. I mean, the dude can write. And then let's just finish up this first paragraph here, first stanza. And chiefly thou, O spirit, right? There's the muse again. O spirit that dost prefer before all temples the upright heart and pure. Right? Now he says, now basically, muse, I know you as a figure that loves good people, pure people, people with good intentions, right? So he's clarifying his good intentions to write. This is also part of the epic formula. Instruct me, for thou knowest, right? Thou from the first wast present, with mighty wings outspread, dove-like satst, sat, right? Past tense of sit, satst, brooding on the vast abyss and made it pregnant. Now that is an incredible image. The idea that one of the earliest gods is the god of inspiration, the god of writing, the god of poetry, that looks upon chaos, looks upon things that are unformed, unorganized, definitely not shaped into beautiful forms, let's say, or at least recognizable forms, and inseminates them, makes them pregnant, right? This is parallel with the way the King James Bible begins, which is the word, right? The word is the thing that gives life to chaos, right? That's how the King James Bible begins. Now you might wonder why he's paralleling the King James Bible. Why would a Christian, Milton was a Protestant, a devout Christian, a Puritan, which is the nickname for certain types of Protestants. It was originally a negative nickname, but okay. Why would he want to parallel King James Bible? He has the word in the beginning, he mentions Moses, and here he's thinking up of an image, this image of the chaos being impregnated, inseminated by the word, by the spirit of poetry, by the spirit of creation, through words, right? At least that's the way I'm interpreting it. Why would he do that? Well, think about this. Remember, I told you he was on the side against Charles I. The father of Charles I is James I, the guy who sponsored the translation and establishment of the Bible that we know as the King James Bible. So by Milton writing his own creation story, complete with rebels and armor and certain ways of interpreting the origin of the world, he is actually posing competition against the King James Version of the world. The King James Version is an Anglican Bible, right? It's a Bible of the Church of England. It has some elements that Milton would agree with, and we'll maybe on another time we'll talk about specifically the elements in the King James Bible that are what kind of Protestant elements. They are very interesting and complicated theological questions, but it's definitely the Bible that's sponsored by the other side of the political spectrum, right? It's the Bible sponsored by King James I. In fact, a lot of the war started not just over the taxation, but over being certain groups of Protestants being forced to follow certain Anglican forms of prayer, right? Not because of this Bible, but because of another document called the Book of Common Prayer. But so this is one of the kind of beautiful, complex reasons why Milton is kind of putting his story up against the King James story of the Bible. Again, this is something that's lost to time for most people. If I say Paradise Lost and if I say King James Bible, most people wouldn't associate those two things. Of course, if you're knowledgeable, you know about that, you've studied this, then you do. But I'm, highlighting this. So he says, dove-like sat brooding on the vast abyss and mates it pregnant, right? What in me is dark, illumine. Right? Whatever is dark inside of me, whatever I'm ignorant about, please offer me some light. And this is especially poignant considering that Milton is blind by the time he writes this. What is low, raise and support. In other words, if I have bad intentions or something, raise up, let me do things for the right reasons. That to the height of this great argument, I may assert eternal providence and justify the ways of God to man. One of the most famous lines in all of English literature, explaining why he needs to write this poem. He wants to assert eternal providence. So the word providence in this case means the way God has kind of set up a plan for the universe, and justify. Now, justify today means to make an argument for something that people don't agree with or may be resistant to. But in this case, it's not what the word means. It just means to explain or to create a strong foundation for understanding the ways of God, right? So I want to justify the ways of God to men. Okay? And that's the first stanza. And it took a while for me to explain a lot of that. And, hope you guys took some pauses if you wanted to think about certain things. But I think it's good sometimes to, really break down and go down into the text. And you guys could have, of course, many of you have done this on your own. You don't need me to do that, but maybe you'd be interested in the way that I do it. And maybe that'll open up other avenues of thinking, of writing about this poem. And we'll go on to other parts. I want to talk to you guys about the heaven of hell, hell of heaven thing when Satan speaks to his so-called troops. Later on, that'll be another part, another video. But for now, I just want to say, thank you for spending time with me and some of the ideas that I'm putting out there. A lot of this is based on, a lot of reading of other scholars, of critics, and I don't claim, huge originality here, but maybe bringing it all together in one place. And if it is the first time you're hearing some of this, that would be great, as a way to get into Paradise Lost. Okay, guys, so have a wonderful day, and I'll catch up with you soon.